I never had the best relationship with my parents, but it wasn't bad either. They were always more partial to my sister Sarah, who is now 32, and I was used to being in her shadow growing up. She got the newest phones, better clothes, and more attention, while I had to make do with hand-me-downs and work part-time jobs since I was 16 to afford the things I wanted. My parents always undervalued me, gave my sister $400,000 freely, and sent me the bill for my wedding, so my response left them stunned. The real shock came when Sarah got married 3 years ago, and my parents gave her and her husband a hopping $400,000 as a wedding gift, which they used to buy a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood at the time. I was genuinely happy for her, even though it hurt a little because I had my own life going on, doing well as a software engineer, saving up a respectable amount of money, and dating Tom, who would eventually become my husband. I figured my time was up, would arrive, but I didn't focus on the fact that my parents had never given me anything like what they gave Sarah. Fast forward to last year, when Tom proposed, and I was ecstatic. We had been dating for years, and he was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. We planned a simple wedding, nothing too extravagant, because we wanted to save money for the future. Even though it was crucial, we had budgeted about $36,000, which felt reasonable for the kind of wedding we wanted. Elegant, but my parents surprised me by offering to cover the entire wedding. I was touched because it seemed like they were finally showing me how important I was. They asked enthusiastically about venues and vendors and seemed genuinely interested in helping. I didn't think much about the amount, figuring that since they had done so much for Sarah, they might want to do something for me as well. I never expected them to contribute nearly as much as they did for Sarah, but their offer to cover the wedding seemed generous, and the wedding day was ideal. Had a small, private wedding with close family and friends just the way we wanted it. My parents spoke, danced with us, and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. I felt like I was finally being treated equally, as if they were proud of me. Tom and I intended to go on our honeymoon the following week, but we had some work obligations to finish up before we left. 2 days after the wedding, I received an email from my father, but instead of the kind note or leftover wedding gift card I had imagined, there was an itemized invoice attached as a surprise. I felt as though someone had punched me in the stomach when I looked at the screen, and the invoice totaled $3,445, down to the last flower arrangement and appetizer. Tom found me sitting there frozen, and when I showed him the email, he was furious. It wasn't about the money. We could afford it if we needed to, but that wasn't the point my parents had offered. The email was brief and cold, asking that you settle this as soon as possible. Your mother, and I expect prompt payment. The more I considered it, the more irate I became because I hadn't asked them to pay for anything. They had come to me, offered it as a gift, and even seemed thrilled to be involved in the planning process. This wasn't just about the money. It was about years of being treated less favorably than Sarah, who received $400,000 as a gift from them when she got married. They didn't ask her to repay them in any way, and now they were basically billing me for my wedding, treating it like a loan, as if all the emotional baggage from years of favoritism had finally culminated in this single act of cruelty. The following morning, after a long, restless night of discussing everything with Tom, I decided to write my parents a check for the entire amount, but I also sent them a letter explaining how hurt I was. I reminded them that I had been independent since I was 16, paying my own way while watching them give everything to Sarah, and I wrote that when they offered to pay for the wedding, I didn't want to confront them directly because I knew I wouldn't be able to control my emotions, and I didn't want this to escalate into a physical altercation. I thought they would finally treat me the same way they had always treated my sister, but they caught me off guard. I didn't hold back and told them that I had been ignoring a lot of things and never mentioned how differently they treated Sarah and me, but I couldn't stand this cruel bait and switch. They made me think they were giving me a gift, then demanded repayment as if I were a stranger rather than their daughter, and I also wrote that this would be the last time we ever interacted financially. After that, I would refuse any further offers of assistance, support, or gifts from them. I clarified it that I didn't want anything from them going forward, not even an inheritance, and that they could give it all to Sarah since they had already done so with everything else. I mailed the check and letter and blocked their numbers because I needed space. Tom agreed with my decision, and I felt relieved when I mailed everything. But after that, they went radio silent for days, and I didn't hear from them, which only gave me more fuel. Distant aunts, uncles, and family friends started phoning and texting me to accuse me of being dramatic and ungrateful. They said that my parents had done a lot for me and that I was exaggerating things. Sarah also called me and yelled at me about how I was destroying the family and that I should have just paid the invoice without fussing. Sarah always takes their side, so why wouldn't she? I haven't replied to any of them. On the one hand, I feel justified in my actions after years of being treated as second best. Tom's family has been tremendously supportive throughout this, and his parents were appalled when they learned what my parents had done. They had been checking in on us every day, but the constant messages from my side of the family are beginning to wear me down. I wanted to defend myself, but I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. Am I being too sensitive, or was it unreasonable of me to expect that they would treat my wedding as a gift like they did with Sarah? Should I have just been able to accept it and move on? I am genuinely stuck and unsure if I am the one in the wrong. While part of me feels like I had every right to be upset and defend myself, another part of me wonders if I have just caused an irreversible rift in my family. Do you guys have any updates since my last post? I wonder if I made the right decision. Did I handle this the wrong way? Should I have tried to talk to my parents before cutting them off? Things have gotten worse. I had no idea that sending that letter and check would start such a chain reaction. But yesterday morning I woke up to an email from my mother. It got through because she used her work email, which I hadn't blocked yet. The email was lengthy and self-righteous, explaining that the invoice they sent me wasn't meant to be taken seriously and that they never really intended to cash the check. She claimed that the entire situation was a lesson in financial responsibility that they had wanted to test. After reading a life lesson, it became even more evident that it wasn't about love or fairness, but rather about control. They wanted to see if I would resist or obediently comply. It felt manipulative and cruel, so without hesitation, I mobile deposited the check. Once they felt I had learned my lesson, they planned to tear it up and surprise me with a gift of $100,000 as a real wedding gift. After the check was cashed, I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions, so I replied to my mother's email in a brief and straightforward manner, thanking her for confirming that this was a purposeful test rather than a misunderstanding. I'd also blocked her work email because I knew there would be more attempts to get in touch with me, and I wasn't interested in any more games or so-called lessons. Later that evening, the situation worsened when Sarah unexpectedly showed up at my apartment and began yelling my name while she knocked loudly on my door. Answering first in the hopes that she would give up and go, she began yelling through the door that I was being childish and making this whole thing bigger than it needed to be. She claimed that our parents were only trying to teach me responsibility because they were concerned about my spending habits. That comment from Sarah, of all people, made my blood boil. This was the same woman who had never paid her own phone bill and had never worked a day in her life without my parents' help, yet she had the gall to lecture me about money matters. Sarah continued to rant about how I was tearing the family apart over something so trivial, and that I should just apologize to our parents and move on. She insisted that I was overreacting and that this whole situation was my fault, so I didn't answer. I didn't open the door. I just quietly started recording everything on my phone. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I wanted to have documents in case this turned into something even messier. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally left, but not before accusing me of being selfish and attempting to break off ties with the family over money. After she was gone, I sat in silence for a while, feeling the weight of everything. Sarah's outburst only confirmed what I had known for years, that she would always support them, regardless of how irrational or hurtful their actions were. Later that night, I received more messages from extended family members, indicating that Sarah had gone straight to my parents following her unsuccessful attempt to connect with me. Now that they were mobilizing the troops, my phone was inundated with texts from aunts, uncles, and even some family friends. The majority of the messages followed the same pattern, accusing me of causing needless drama and urging me to apologize to my parents for how I had treated them. One message in particular caught my attention. It was from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years, and she said that I was fortunate to have parents who cared enough to teach me these lessons and that I should be thankful that they were willing to spend so much money on my wedding. Declaring that I was fortunate to have parents who wanted to be involved in my life, I was shocked by how quickly everyone had turned against me. It seemed like they all believed my parents were right because they had the money and the power, and nobody seemed to care about the years of favoritism or the emotional manipulation that had preceded this. All they saw was that I was rejecting my parents' alleged generosity, and that was enough for them to turn against me. By this time, Tom was beginning to worry about how much this was having an impact on me. He persisted in asking if I wanted to disconnect from social media and turn off my phone for a while in order to give myself some peace. He attempted to reassure me that I wasn't at fault and reminded me of all the instances in which my parents had favored Sarah and how they had consistently used money as a tool to control us both. What was most frustrating was that I was unable to obtain any genuine explanations from my parents, who genuinely believed in their own story and painted themselves as the misunderstood parents, who were merely attempting to assist me while I was the ungrateful daughter who had blown everything out of proportion. I began to question whether I should have handled things differently. Perhaps instead of sending that letter and blocking them, I should have sat down with them and had a genuine conversation. But I knew how those conversations typically proceeded. They would turn everything around until I was the one apologizing for feeling hurt in the first place. It was a cycle I had been caught in for years, and I wasn't sure if I had the energy to go through it again. For now, though, I think it's been a roller coaster of emotions over the past few days, and your support has meant more than you can imagine. I tried to remain strong through this, but things had taken yet another unexpected turn. A few days after Sarah's visit, I received a call from my husband. I wanted to start by thanking everyone for their responses. Reading through your comments, advice, and personal stories really helped me process what has been happening. My uncle's father's brother, and I hadn't spoken to him in years, so I wasn't sure what to expect because he has never been close to the family. However, I assumed he was trying to tell me to make amends with my parents like everyone else was doing. But what he told me shocked me and put everything in perspective in a way I hadn't seen before. He began by saying he had heard what was going on through the family grapevine and felt compelled to reach out because apparently this wasn't the first time my parents had pulled a stunt like this 20 years ago or something similar. He explained that back then, my dad didn't support him. Instead, he sided with their parents, which caused a huge rift between the two brothers that had never fully healed. My uncle described how he had always felt abandoned by my dad and how it had taken him years to come to terms with it. This had happened between him and my grandparents, my father's parents. Due to his refusal to comply with their manipulative tactics, they smeared his name throughout the family, accusing him of trying to steal from them and being ungrateful for everything they had done for him. The more he talked about how their family functioned, the more it began to make sense. My parents weren't just acting strangely, they were repeating a pattern that had been established long before I was even born. They had learned this behavior from their own parents, and my dad, who had been complicit in his brother's predicament all those years ago, was now playing the role of the father. Hearing him talk about the past was like listening to my own story, but in a different context. My grandparents had used money and manipulation to control my uncle, just like my parents were attempting to do with me. Similar role to mine, my uncle also explained that his refusal to follow my grandparents' instructions had serious repercussions. Following the argument, my grandparents cut him off entirely, both financially and emotionally, portraying him as the family's black sheep. Some relatives still hold on to the false information my grandparents spread about him, saying it was all about control. When they were unable to maintain control over him, they removed him from their lives. Hearing my uncle's story chilled me to the bone. It was like a mirror image of what exactly happened. My parents were upset with me because I didn't play along with their game, and instead of attempting to understand my point of view, they turned the entire family against me. I began to realize how deep this toxic cycle ran and how ingrained their belief that they could manipulate their children was after I spoke with my uncle. I couldn't stop thinking about everything he said, and it made me wonder if my father's behavior was motivated by guilt or if he knew he had abandoned his brother for years. My parents had based their entire relationship with Sarah and me on the idea that we owed them something, and any departure from that script was viewed as betrayal. However, the more I considered it, the more I realized that this wasn't about me at all, but rather about them, their unresolved issues, and the unhealthy dynamics they had learned from their parents. In the days that followed, I continued to receive more messages from family members, and it became evident that Sarah had been working extra hours to rally. In a lengthy text message, one of my cousins, with whom I had always been close, accused me of being selfish and disrespectful for not appreciating all that my parents had done for me. She said that there was still time to make amends, but that I needed to humble myself and apologize before it was too late. Her message was full of the same arguments that everyone else had been using, and it was exhausting to read. I came to the realization that I had grown up in a household where love was conditional, and that everything had conditions, whether it was financial assistance or emotional support. Tom has been my rock through all of this. After my uncle called, we sat down and had a lengthy conversation about the future. He assured me that regardless of what happens, we'll get through this together, and that I don't owe anyone anything. Not my parents, not Sarah, and definitely not the extended family members who had suddenly turned into armchair psychologists. His support has been unwavering, and for that I'm grateful. Though I am incredibly grateful, I still feel a little conflicted even with Tom by my side. My parents had emotionally damaged me, and I still wondered if I was at fault, and if there was a way to make amends without compromising my boundaries. I spent hours pondering whether there was a way to make amends without putting my own mental health at risk. Then, oddly, I got a voicemail from my dad, the first time he had attempted to get in touch with me, since I had sent the letter in to check as he didn't apologize or acknowledge what had happened. But it was obvious that something had changed. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that I wasn't going to back down this time. I haven't responded yet, and part of me wants to call him back to see if there's a chance we can have an honest conversation about everything. But another part of me knows that this could just be another attempt. His voice sounded different instead of angry or demanding like I had expected. He said in the message that he didn't want to fight anymore and that he was willing to talk if I was open to it. I want to think that my parents can change and that they will finally see me as an equal and not just someone they can control. But I also know that if I do decide to talk to my dad, my uncle's words will never admit they're wrong because they don't think they are. I need to be ready for the possibility that nothing will change right now because I'm still processing everything. My uncle's revelations, family messages, and my dad's voicemail, and I'm not sure what my next course of action will be. Tom and I have been concentrating on our lives and our future together, trying to create something healthy and free from the toxic patterns of our families. But the question still lingers. Am I doing the right thing by standing my ground, or am I pushing away the only family I've ever known? While I would like a definitive answer, I'm still in the same old boat, and maybe that's okay. I'll keep you all updated as things progress, but for now, I'm taking things one day at a time. As I navigate this mess with my family, your advice and support have been invaluable. When I first posted, I wasn't sure where things were headed or what I wanted to do, but after reading through your comments and giving it a lot of thought, I've come to some important realizations. One thing that really stood out for me from your responses was how many of you pointed out that for a long time I've been forcing myself to make things good, with many of you also mentioned that I might have been too forgiving in my assumptions about my dad's guilt. But it turns out that I finally accepted that it's okay if things don't return to normal because, honestly, I'm not even sure what normal was. The dynamic with my parents has always been unhealthy, and I've spent years trying to ignore that. Now I realize that it's okay to let go of the idea that things will ever be the way I want them to be. It's possible that my dad's behavior was motivated by guilt and that he could change, but that doesn't excuse his actions or the years of manipulation, favoritism, and emotional control. Regardless of how guilty he feels, it doesn't erase the harm that has been done, and it doesn't mean I have to let him off the hook for it. However, I also realize that I do need closure. I need to close this chapter of my life, whether or not it involves making amends with my parents. For this reason, I felt compelled to meet my dad because I felt it was something I had to do. When I first met my dad, I could tell he wasn't the same person I had grown up fearing. He seemed worn down, almost defeated, and for the first time in my life, he actually seemed apologetic. He didn't say, "I'm sorry" out loud, but he did apologize for how the wedding had gone and for how my mom and Sarah had treated me. He even mentioned that he had spoken to some of our relatives and asked them to stop bothering me, which was a slight relief. But then he did something that startled me. When he attempted to return the money, he took out the same check I had given him for the wedding costs and slid it across the table in my direction, requesting that I do so. He claimed that he and my mother had talked about it and that they wanted to put things right, but this time I was ready, so I made it clear that I wasn't returning the money. I made it clear that this wasn't just about the money, but also about everything that had happened over the years, including how I had always been placed as second best and the emotional toll that had taken on me. Wouldn't fix that, and that this wasn't about a financial transaction anymore. I could see his frustration when I refused the money. It was as if he had run out of options. I believed that in his mind, returning the money was his way of saying sorry, but it didn't address the deeper issues that had been brewing for years. He couldn't see that the damage wasn't something that could be undone with a check. After I told him I wasn't taking the money, he sat in silence for a few minutes before declaring that he didn't want to lose me. I could tell he was trying to be sincere, but even in that moment, I realized that I wasn't interested in reconciliation, not in the way he wanted it, or in returning to the status quo or acting as though everything would magically get better again. Instead, I needed some space and a genuine break from the toxic dynamic that had characterized our relationship for so long. I told him that I needed a break from the family and that, although this meeting was important, it didn't change much. I explained that I wasn't ready to just he didn't argue with me, which surprised me, but instead he nodded and said he understood. He didn't try to persuade me to return or tell me that I was overreacting, like he had done in the past. In some ways, that was more of an apology than anything else he could have said. As I left the meeting, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't relieved either. I think I had gone into the meeting hoping for some sort of closure. But closure isn't as neat and tidy as we want it to be. There wasn't a clear resolution, no dramatic reconciliation, or an emotional breakthrough was simply completed. I had said what I needed to say, and it was now up to me to move on. Since then, I've taken some precautions to keep my peace. I've blocked a few more family members who were still bugging me about the situation, and Tom and I have been concentrating on starting a family without the constant stress of family drama. It's been nice to finally have some breathing room, but there's still a part of me that feels conflicted. I know that I made the right choice by defending myself, but that doesn't mean it's easy. There are days when I question whether I could have handled things differently or whether I should have given my parents another chance. But then I think back on all the years I felt inadequate, and I remind myself that I deserve better. Sarah hasn't contacted me since the meeting with my dad, which I assume is because she's still upset about the fallout. But I'm not interested in trying to mend our relationship at this time because she's made it clear where her loyalties lie, and I've come to terms with the fact that our relationship will never be what it could have been. Letting go of the hope that we can ever be close has been both painful and liberating. As for my dad, I'm not sure what the future holds, but he seemed sincerely please excuse what had happened. But I'm not sure if that's enough to rebuild a relationship for now. I'm going to keep concentrating on myself and my happiness because if I've learned anything from this whole experience, it's that I deserve to put myself first for once, and I'm going to do just that. I suppose that's where things stand right now. It's not the happy ending I might have hoped for, but it's thank you once more to everyone who has been following along and providing the conclusion I needed, which sometimes suffices. Support, I can't express how grateful I am. Say,